The bathroom door opens. Champagne still trembles in the glass. Her 2-year relationship dies in silence under gold club lights and a stranger's steady gaze. Across the room stands a man carved from darkness and discipline, the kind of man who looks as if he has never once been surprised by human weakness. When Sloane asks him for one kiss, he gives her something far more dangerous. A beginning. Behind his calm eyes lives a name feared in places she has never seen, and behind her heartbreak lives a need so raw it cannot tell the difference between comfort and catastrophe. By the time the city lights fade and the guns come out, the audience will realize this was never a simple romance. It was a beautifully lit disaster from the very first frame.
Sloane Mercer gets hit with betrayal and her first instinct is revenge. With a 2-year relationship imploding, she swallows a scream. Then she spots a mystery man, calm as a bomb expert, and offers him a deal. A 10-second fake-out kiss. He just nods. This dude is not messing around. He acts with total purpose, tilting her chin with shocking realness before kissing her in the middle of the crowd, making the world vanish. That one kiss packed more punch than her boyfriend had in 2 years. When he lets go, Sloane is completely breathless. Meanwhile, her now ex is frozen solid behind her, his face a mask of pure shock. She doesn't even grant him a look. Her new accomplice meets her gaze, unnervingly calm, and notes, 8 seconds, but effective. Sloane has no idea she just started a war they're not ready to fight. I'm Lena. This is where my analysis starts. Chapter 1. The perfectly timed, incorrect kiss. Here's the trigger. Noir's bye-bye fee restroom door swings open, destroying a 2-year relationship in under 3 seconds. Mateo's standing there, shirt half undone, with a lazy smirk. He's got 2 women with him, one on the counter, one with champagne, both looking like a party just ended. Sloane's reaction is to just freeze up. No tears, no screaming. A completely cold response to the chaos. She just counts silently to 10, the only thing keeping her grounded, then turns and walks away. Noir's dim, calculated lighting just made the whole nightmare feel even more unreal. The club's beat is a thick, confusing pulse in the air. About 10 paces later, she finds Bex, her ride or die for 7 years and tattoo partner. Bex just appears in the dark hall like she has a 6th sense, her friend Dar locking onto Sloane's misery before a word is even said. Bex's eyes jump from Sloane's face to the VIP door and back again, instantly piecing together the entire disaster from her friend's expression. And it's then that Bex gives what might be the single most useless piece of advice for a life-imploding moment. Breathe, is all Bex says. I am breathing, Sloane shoots back, storming past her to the bar. Noir's bar is all gold-veined black marble, lit to make every bottle look like a trap. She picks a stupidly expensive drink, a tiny act of destruction to match the wreckage inside her. In a sharp turn, her elbow smacks right into the guy beside her. He's tall, wearing a tailored dark suit and radiating a quiet authority. He holds his whiskey with the kind of chill composure of a man who has never been surprised by anything in his life. His deep, unwavering gaze meets hers, and the apology on her lips just evaporates under his intensity. Sorry, she finally manages to push out. He gives a small nod, his silent assessment of her continuing with a creepy calm, like he's watching a game piece move. She reaches for her drink, but he stays perfectly still. Sloane, Mateo's voice cuts in from behind her, now loaded with menace, his accent just another part of his act. His closeness and his cologne, now forever linked to the betrayal, trigger a pure fight-or-flight response. She spins back to the stranger. He's still there, holding his whiskey, watching her like he's front row at a play. Leaning in, her voice drops to a desperate, raw whisper, all pretense gone. Please, she breathes, pretend you're with me for just 10 seconds. He sizes her up, his gaze flicking past her, probably to Mateo. A tiny shift in his expression shows a quick, final decision. His eyes snap back to hers. After a 2-second beat, he puts down his drink, takes her face, and kisses her. This right here needs a closer look. This was way more than a quick peck. His hand was a solid, warm anchor on her skin, his other braced on the bar, holding her steady in her free fall. He kissed her with a slow, deliberate purpose, as if every second was meant to send a message. For 4 solid seconds, her mind went completely blank, wiping out the club, the champagne, what she was wearing, even who she was. When he pulled back, the air between them crackled with energy like a boundary had been crossed for good. His intense gaze stayed locked on hers, filled with an emotion she couldn't identify but couldn't look away from. A heavy silence fell behind her. She dared to peek back. Mateo stood there, jaw hanging open, his rehearsed excuses gone, his face a picture of pure, unfiltered shock. Then Mateo's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. He turned and left without a word, a retreat that was a confession in itself. The man beside her waited until Mateo was gone, then looked at her, a small smile on his lips. 8 seconds, he rumbled, but it proved effective. She bolted to the bathroom with Bex, who grabbed her arm and started grilling her. "Who is that man?" Bex demanded, her voice full of alarm. "Sloane, who was he?" "I have no idea," Sloane answered, dropping the one terrifying truth she actually knew. In another corner of the club, the man in the suit swirled the whiskey in his glass as his associate approached. This was Soren Vale, about 15 years older, with an unreadable expression and the vibe of someone who carries dangerous secrets. "Do you know who he is?" Soren asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the spot Mateo just left. "The one she was with." The suited man paused before he answered. When he finally looked up, he wasn't shocked, just filled with the cold certainty of a hunter that has its target locked. "Mateo Varga," he said, his voice flat. Soren waited, gauging his reaction. "Should I track him?" "Keep him under surveillance," the first man ordered. Then he did something that clearly rattled his associate. He just stood there, staring at the empty hallway where Sloane had disappeared. He was Cale Rienzo, a name that meant nothing to her yet. Chapter 2. A serious masquerade. Outside Noir, the Manhattan night air was sharp and biting. The huge line to get inside felt like a cruel joke. The world was moving on while hers had just fallen apart. Bex was nearby, holding their coats and holding back a flood of questions, knowing silence was better than interrogation right now. Kyle Rienzo stood just 2 steps behind them. He was following them, uninvited, with a silent intensity that was more unnerving than an open threat. Just then, Mateo appeared. He came out of a side door, walking with purpose, his face set for a prepared speech. But seeing Sloane with the man from the bar made his fake composure crack for half a second before he pulled himself together and came closer. "Sloane," Mateo began, his voice a perfect example of a non-apology. "Let me explain what you saw." Then that switch flipped in her again, that gut instinct. She turned to the stranger who was watching her with an expectant look and made a crazy proposal before she could take it back. "Will you pretend to be my boyfriend?" she asked softly. "For 1 month, just until he gets it." The man was still for 3 long seconds, a pause where she fought the urge to retract the insane offer. Then his hand settled on her waist with a firm, warm possession that made no sense. A detail her broken mind couldn't register. "Done," was his only answer. Mateo took one more step. The man with Sloane didn't move, just watched Mateo with the cool confidence of someone who knows they have the upper hand. That's all it took. I watched the exact second Mateo's nerve shattered. The defeat showed in his eyes first, a quick, unwilling flicker of giving up. He met Kale's gaze for 2 full seconds, started to speak, then stopped and just walked away. Bex's face was a blank slate as she whispered urgently, "Sloane, I have no idea who he is, but you're explaining everything in the car." Kale's sedan pulled up to the curb, its back door already open. Bex gave Sloane a 5-second look with her eyebrows raised before she jumped into a taxi. Sloane was then led onto dark leather seats next to a man whose last name was still a mystery. The cars inside was a silent bubble, sealing them off from the city and everyone in it. The city lights blurred into orange and white streaks on the glass, a visual mess I watched while trying to get my thoughts straight. "What is your full name?" I asked, saying it to the window. "Kale," he replied. The name just hung there in a silence he didn't try to fill. I faced him, seeing that same small smile. It was a sharp, knowing look that showed he was totally satisfied with how the night turned out. "And your last name?" I pushed. "Gale will do for now," he answered. This wasn't him dodging the question, it was a statement of fact, said like it was obvious. The conversation was over. Sighing, I looked back out the window. "Last night was a one-off," I said. "It was," he agreed, his voice totally without regret. "I don't normally deal with strangers in bars." "I'm aware of that," he said. "And I don't normally agree." His words weren't a judgment, just another fact delivered with his usual unsettling calm. His cold detachment felt more dangerous than any open aggression. The car slid to a silent stop outside my place on the Lower East Side, a place I had never told him about. As I opened my mouth to ask how, Kale beat me to it, his gaze locked on the world outside the car. Kale hit her with a warning. "That guy from the club! Be careful!" Her body's first response was a nervous laugh her brain couldn't stop. "You don't even know who he is," she shot back. Kale's expression didn't move, his calm face a perfect mask for whatever he was plotting. "Oh, I know exactly who he is," he said. She stared at him for 3 solid seconds, trying to make his words fit her reality, but nothing clicked. She got out of the car and walked to her building, key in hand, his insane statement replaying over and over in her head. Her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. It was Mateo. "We need to talk. This isn't over." She slammed the block button like a reflex, trying to shield herself from the incoming storm. But by morning, he was posted up outside her studio, leaning against the brick like he was the most reasonable guy in the world. She saw him through the window before he saw her and for 2 heartbeats considered just leaving. But a wave of defiance hit her. This was her territory, and their history gave him 0 rights here. She walked in, a tap on the glass. She ignored it. He stood watch for 40 minutes straight. She tracked the time on the clock before he finally gave up and left. A minute later, her phone rang from an unlisted number. She picked up, assuming it was Bex, who was always pulling random communication stunts. A deep voice asked, "Do I need to step in, or do you have this under control?" It had a slight accent, one she didn't notice last night but was now blaringly obvious. She froze in her workspace. "Where did you get this number?" she demanded. There was a short pause. A caller Rienzo always finishes what he starts, Sloane. Then he hung up. She stared at the phone, the name Rienzo echoing like a word without a meaning. Somewhere else, Call set his phone on a glass table while his guy, Soren, watched from a window, debating whether to say what was on his mind. Soren's comment was a straight-up accusation. "You're using family assets to track a civilian." It was not a question. "They're my assets," Cale replied, not looking up from his papers. After a beat of silence, Soren just pulled out his phone. A move that was pure, silent judgment. Chapter 3: A Flawed Imitation. On Tuesday at 11 in the morning, Kale just appeared at my studio, uninvited, carrying 2 coffees. It was suddenly clear this next month was going to be a whole new level of complicated. He strolled in like he expected to be welcomed, and my own body betrayed me, moving on autopilot the second I saw him. He put one of the drinks on my desk, his eyes scanning the studio with that calm, analytical stare I was starting to recognize. This wasn't friendly curiosity. He was taking inventory. His gaze swept over my drawings, the furniture, the desk, and finally landed back on me, his expression giving nothing away. He pointed out, "Your inks are sorted by color." My correction was instant. By spectrum, it's a meaningful difference. He just sipped his coffee, not arguing, clearly just filing away the data. Next came the contract, scribbled on a napkin. A lesson I learned from Matteo that verbal agreements are basically ghosts. Their only real substance is how each person chooses to remember them. I pushed the napkin toward Kale. He glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds, his face a total blank. The list had 6 rules. First, no physical contact unless it was required from the performance. Surprise visits to my studio were banned, a rule I noted he'd already broken. He was not allowed to make decisions for me. The deal was for 1 month, and only I could agree to extend it. The last rule, which I'd rewritten 3 times, was clear: no repeats of what happened at Noir. Kale read it all in silence. Then he pulled out a thick black pen and signed the napkin's corner like a diplomat signing a treaty. I stared at his. All right, so check this out. Kale slaps his autograph on a napkin in about 3 seconds, leaving our girl totally mind blown. She's like, "Dude, it's a napkin." But he fires back, "You handed it over like a contract." The sheer audacity. This guy is a total pro at the game. He instantly schedules 10 days of dates, including 3 dinners, a VIP reservation, and even a chill Sunday meal with Bex, who then hyped him up in texts for 40 minutes straight. Then came the power play. Kale's hand on her back as they entered a room. It was a calculated act of ownership, a claim only for her to feel. The way he'd lean in to talk in a loud bar created a private bubble for just us, shutting everyone else out with expert ease. It took a constant effort to remember that none of this was real. Matteo's reactions in the meantime were both predictable and newly terrifying. The anonymous calls stopped once I quit answering. A bouquet of white roses showed up on Wednesday, a huge deal since he'd never sent flowers in our entire 2-year relationship. He showed up near the studio twice more, just watching me from across the street. His surveillance had a chill to it that went way beyond simple jealousy. She felt a colder, more methodical vibe from his watch, a quality she didn't have a word for. The creepy feeling was just filed away with her other simmering dramas. On Thursday, the social event kicked off, hosted on top of a midtown skyscraper where the incredible city view was a good distraction from the people in the room. The party's real purpose was a total mystery to her. Kale had called it a business dinner, which was technically true, but also hid a much bigger story. A slow realization dawned on her as she noticed a strange, controlled stillness in all the men. They weren't relaxed, they were tense, like each one was ruling over a secret kingdom. For the first 20 minutes, Kale stayed right with her, making introductions where names and faces all blurred together under the weight of the serious conversations. When he was called away, she was left totally alone, armed with nothing but a wine glass, and a growing certainty she was missing the entire point. In that moment, she had to admit she was completely lost. Soren was standing 2 steps to her left, the quiet, steady presence she was getting used to. Turning to the only familiar face, she gestured at the crowd and said, I feel like this room has a secret rule book that I'm the only one who can't read. Soren actually considered her words before replying, his voice clinical and empty of all emotion. You're interpreting it right. You're just looking at the wrong edition. His confirmation shocked a real, genuine laugh out of her. A tiny moment of relief. When she turned, she locked eyes with Cale from across the room, who was staring right at her, his face a complete void. His gaze on her was relentless, offering zero clues as to what he was thinking. For one stunning second, right before a man in a gray suit got his attention, the look in his eyes changed, carrying a weight that was heavier than any of their previous encounters. The sheer intensity of that look felt like a physical blow, a sudden ice forming in her stomach. From his post, Soren's gaze flickered from Cale to her and then into the distance, his face looking exactly like a strategist watching his worst-case prediction come true. Later that night, my friend Bex called, cutting right to the chase. "You need to explain," she started. "I saw the way that man looked at you on Sunday, Sloane, and among all the ways guys look at you, his is in a totally different category." "It's a paid performance," I told her. "It's just an act." Bex agreed. "And you're his target audience, the only person he's actually trying to convince." I had no response. Bex let the silence hang, a smart move designed to make me think. Her last words before hanging up sounded like a director who already knew the play was going to end in disaster. After that call, sleep was impossible. Right at midnight, the intercom let out a sharp buzz. It was Mateo's voice, flat and cold, coming through the speaker. "You have no idea what you're getting into," it said. She held her breath, her pulse hammering against her ribs. That wasn't the tone of a dumped boyfriend. It had no trace of a broken heart. It was a colder, more systematic kind of threat that her gut registered long before her brain could label it. She only managed to sleep with the hallway light on. Chapter 4: Where the Fake Gets Real. Cale's offer to move into the mansion came on Friday, presented like it was a practical solution, not a life-altering event. To guarantee your safety was the reason he gave. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with a meaning she couldn't yet unpack. Her agreement was a gut reaction that completely bypassed rational thought, a cold, hard fact she decided to just ignore. The mansion was in the Upper East Side, on a street where perfect houses radiated a quiet, untouchable power. The inside was a massive, shadowy space where sound went to die. A huge staircase shot upwards, looking like it was built with pure, unshakable confidence. She was floored, just standing there for 5 seconds, totally dwarfed by the scale of the entrance hall. "You're allowed to touch the stuff," Kayleigh said, popping up beside her. "I'm aware of what I can do," she shot back, and then did exactly that. The problem with living with Kale Rienzo was that no amount of space could ever mute the constant, sharp awareness of him being nearby. A change in the air, the specific sound of his footsteps, that's all it took to know he was in the room. Her attention would snap to him automatically. She spent Saturday morning exploring and stumbled into the library, where the books were organized by size, a system that looked tidy but felt completely wrong. To bring some order to her new, chaotic life, she started rearranging the library by color. Cale appeared at the doorway, materializing out of nowhere, his stillness a calculated power move. His gaze was a complicated scan she was only just learning to decode. He wasn't judging or approving, just hovering in some unreadable space in between. "That's basically heresy," he stated flatly. "It's an aesthetic fix," she replied, her eyes glued to a book. After a beat, he asked, "Are you planning to redo the entire collection?" "That depends on how long I'm staying," she said. The words just slipped out with a double meaning she never intended. Cale didn't respond. When she finally looked up, he was gone, leaving only his question hanging in the air. That Saturday night was a full-blown public showdown, the kind that gets immortalized in gossip columns with strategically blurred photos. She got ready in her assigned room, her reflection caught in a gold-framed mirror, walking down the stairs in a moss-green dress that was definitely pushing the limits of proper. She felt it was the perfect choice. Cale was waiting, and as she got closer, something in his eyes shifted, his usual guard dropping for a second. He said nothing about her dress, but the super deliberate way he opened the door for her was a statement all on its own. During the show's intermission, Vivienne Lacroix appeared. She noticed her instantly, a blonde statue of a woman who carried herself like someone who's always being watched. Vivienne glided through the crowd toward Cale like it was her own backyard, planting her hand on his arm and brushing her lips against his cheek in a clear power move. Cale. Her French accent was both delicate and sharp as a scalpel. It has been some time. Vivienne, he answered, his voice a completely neutral, chilling blank. Her eyes then slid over to our girl, a polite smile failing to hide her sharp sizing up as she murmured, "How long does this particular phase of his usually last? 2 months? 3? Don't stress, darling." He always reverts to the familiar. As the verbal knife hit its mark, Cale's arm tightened around her waist with a firm, protective squeeze. He leaned in, whispering something right by her temple that Vivienne couldn't hear. The words themselves didn't matter. It was the sheer proximity of the act that did all the talking, and it worked. Vivienne's smile faltered for one measurable beat before she expertly snapped her composure back into place. She turned on her heel and left without another word. Our girl was left with the phantom feeling of Cale's arm, a physical imprint she knew wasn't going away anytime soon. Near midnight, back at the mansion, they ended up on the terrace, both silently agreeing to put off the inevitable "what just happened" conversation. Below them, Manhattan was a grid of cold, glowing lights. The chill made her cross her arms as Cale stood apart, leaning against the railing. "You're going to ask about her," he stated, more of a fact than a question. "I was thinking about it," she admitted. He stared at the city for a long moment before he spoke again, his tone completely different. It wasn't weakness, but the usual wall between his thoughts and his words had just vanished. "She wanted the status that comes with my name," Cale said, "but she didn't want the man who came with it. They are not the same thing." She stayed quiet. He kept going, unprompted. "You're the first person in years who had no clue who I was," he noted. "For that, I don't have a script." The air on the terrace suddenly felt a little less cold. Her eyes were locked on his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the intense stillness he had in high-stakes moments. This attraction was no longer something she could brush off as a fluke, a side effect of one kiss at Noir that created fake intimacy. He turned, and their eyes met. The moment became heavy, a physical weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. The space between them was now too charged to be nothing. Cale's eyes dropped to her mouth for a heartbeat. Her breathing stopped cold. He stayed still, and the air between them crackled with things left unsaid. The buzz of Cale's phone shattered the spell. He pulled it out, his face snapping back into its guarded mask. He answered, listened, and when the call was over, his dark eyes had a new look in them. It wasn't alarm. It was an emotion that was colder and way more primal. "What is it?" she asked. Callie watched her for 2 seconds. "Mateo Vargas was seen watching your apartment," he said, "with 2 armed men." The cold slammed back into her with a vengeance. Chapter 5: The Second Collision and the Fall. She went back to her apartment on Monday morning, pushed by a client deadline and the fact that the memory of the terrace made it impossible to concentrate. She claimed she needed her own workspace, a break from the crushing gravity of his house on her thoughts. He didn't fight her on it, just watched her with that calm intensity before agreeing so easily it made her instantly suspicious. Her apartment was exactly the same, a comfortable mess of sketches and coffee mugs. She took a deep breath, the familiar smell of her own space grounding her against the chaos outside. Bex showed up 40 minutes later with pastries and all the pent-up questions she'd been holding back since Friday. They worked all morning in a productive quiet, the kind that only happens between people who don't need to fill the silence. As she finished a sketch, she had no idea that Cale had 2 guys positioned below, one in the lobby pretending to be a courier, the other in a car with a perfect view of the building's entrance. Soren had organized the surveillance without her knowing, a move Cale had approved under the same secret terms. She would have shut it down, which is exactly why they kept her in the dark. At 3 in the afternoon, she was starving. The fridge was empty, so she grabbed her key and went down the back service stairs. She liked that exit out of habit. It was the faster route to the side street. A 2-minute walk took her to an alley, and 3 more blocks got her to the market. She didn't know this route was a total blind spot in Cale's surveillance net, or that her neighbor in 4B, whose shyness she'd misjudged, had been tracking her moves for weeks, reporting back to Mateo like a paid informant. Mateo was half a block from the market. He seemed to pop up out of thin air, but his slow movements radiated the patience of a hunter who has finally found the perfect moment to strike. His expression was the same controlled mask she remembered from Noir, a look of control that was totally fake. Sloane. He said her name with the chilling finality of something long planned. She froze. "There's nothing to say, Mateo. This is a mistake," she declared. He instantly closed the gap between them. "You have no idea who he is, what he is, or the abyss you're walking toward." "I am walking into my own life," she shot back, trying to push past him, but his hand clamped down on her arm. The grip wasn't jealous rage. It was cold, absolute ownership. As he pulled her in, his other hand rose toward her face, his intent terrifyingly clear. In a flash of instinct, a brutal lesson from Bex kicked in as she twisted free, slamming her elbow into his sternum. Mateo staggered back, more surprised than hurt, his expression hardening into a threat far deadlier than anger. His eyes turned to ice as he recalibrated. And then, Cale was just there. He hadn't rushed. That was the first detail that burned itself into her memory. He walked toward Mateo with slow, measured steps, covered in a calm so complete it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. There was zero urgency, only the quiet certainty of a man who doesn't need to be fast to show he's in charge. From her peripheral vision, 2 other figures appeared, silent bodyguards moving with lethal grace. The moment they showed up, Mateo went completely still. Cale stopped a few feet away and just watched him, his presence radiating the crushing weight of the Rienzo legacy, a power she was just beginning to understand. Mateo met his stare with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. It was a long-term, calculated hate, sharpened like a weapon. His voice was a low, cutting whisper. "You are on the wrong side of the line, Rienzo." He said the name as if he knew every dark secret attached to it, its meaning in a world she was completely separate from. The words hit her like a physical blow, a piece of Mateo's puzzle that had no place in her world. Cale didn't say a word. The 2 men moved forward, and Mateo went with them without a fight. A chilling surrender that was more disturbing than a struggle, suggesting he was already thinking about his next move. So, back at the mansion, she's demanding answers. Kale feeds her a watered-down version of the truth, just enough to be a warning without starting a full-blown panic. He admits he's got enemies, big ones, and Mateo? Turns out he runs with a seriously dangerous crowd that uses spies and hired guns. Suddenly, she's a target with a big fat zero for protection. Nobody drops the M word, and she doesn't ask. Like not naming the boogeyman keeps it in the closet. But the truth was obvious. Mateo knew who Kale was, and Kale knew who Mateo was. She was the only pawn on the board who was completely in the dark. She holes up in her room, staring at the walls until the silence gets deafening. Then, a knock. It's Soren with the dead serious look of a guy about to drop a bomb. "Mateo's gone," he says, his voice totally flat. His security detail was found neutralized 2 blocks away. A pro team with deep pockets extracted him in under 10 minutes. He pauses. He had outside help we didn't see coming. My mistake. For Soren to admit a screw-up was like a code red alert, signaling a disaster bigger than any report could explain. Just then, her phone buzzes. A tag from some sleazy tabloid she barely remembers following. It's a picture of her leaving Kale's place in his coat, which the caption spins into a story about her being Mr. Rienzo's latest fling. The article paints her as some low-class curiosity, and Vivian Lacqua smashes the like button in 30 seconds. Her reaction isn't panic, it's a strategic retreat. A tattoo artist caught in a war started by a 10-second lie, now getting roasted by the public. Getting publicly dragged was a curveball she never saw coming, breaking their unspoken rules. Kale's knock interrupts her literally packing her bags. He clocks the suitcase, then her face, looking not surprised, just deeply exhausted, his whole tough guy facade cracking. "You're staying put until I know you're safe," he lays down the law. She snaps back instantly. "You don't give me orders." A tense silence hangs between them before his voice comes back, deeper, with all the usual control stripped away. "No, but I'm worried about you." She glares at him, the whole hallway crackling with their silent power play. Behind her, the suitcase screamed, "I'm out." But now she wasn't so sure. "I know it was Vivian," he says, cutting her off, "and I'm handling it." "I don't need to be handled," she retorts. "I'm not some problem you need to fix." "I'm not treating you like a problem," Kale fires back. Then, his whole tone shifts. That cold, boss man vibe just evaporates. His next words hit her like a ton of bricks, totally raw. "I'm treating you like someone who matters." The line is so out of left field her brain short circuits, and she literally can't move. She's just frozen in the doorway, hand on the knob, trapped by his eyes. The quiet is a massive question mark hanging in the air. "Are you going to see her?" she finally chokes out. "On my way now," he says, and just leaves, leaving her in limbo with the open suitcase on the bed like a fresh wound. She's trapped between staying and going, knowing that being mad is one thing, but running is not the answer. 40 minutes pass, she hears his car leave. She watches from the window, the suitcase a silent dare. But plot twist, he's back in less than an hour. She's in the kitchen making tea, trying to find some calm in the chaos. She hears his footsteps before he appears in the doorway. "It's handled," he announces. "What did you say to her?" she shoots back. He just walks past her and grabs a glass. "I made it clear that if she so much as looked at you wrong, there would be consequences she couldn't handle. A beat. And that her part in this life is over, with or without you." Her teacup stops dead in the air. "You said that?" I did, he says, as casually as talking about the weather. And boom, Vivian was erased from the board. No coming back. Kale made this huge power move without even knowing if she'd stay. That was another game changer. She puts her cup down. "Thank you," she whispers, the words feeling way too small. He locks eyes with her, his face unusually open, and doesn't say a word. But the silence is electric, totally on purpose. They're on the same frequency again, a straight callback to that night on the terrace. A phone ringing somewhere else shatters the moment. Soren appears looking like death warmed over. "Mateo's gone," he reports, eyes glued to Kale. "We found his escort team, neutralized 2 blocks from here. He had external support lined up. The abduction was clean." Kale doesn't move a muscle, just sets his glass down with intense precision. She knows this stillness. It's how he processes a threat. "Time since capture?" Kale demands. "Under 10 minutes, Soren confirms." The silence that follows is different, loaded with a violent ticking bomb urgency. She already got the boring rundown from Soren earlier, but watching Kale process the news live, that was a whole other level of terrifying. The way he went dead still, his focus narrowing into an ice-cold point, made the danger feel more real than any report. He meets her eyes, and she finally sees real care in them. Not ownership, but deep concern for her and the price of protecting her. "You're staying here tonight," he declares. It's not an order, just the final answer to the risk assessment he just ran. A conclusion, honestly, she'd already reached herself. She doesn't unpack the suitcase, but she doesn't close it either. It was a choice made without a single word. The open bag just sits there on the bed, a symbol of her undecided fate. She stays because she knows running now is an act of fear, not freedom. A bad call she's learned from experience always ends in disaster. They end up eating in the kitchen, the one room in this giant house that feels human. With his sleeves rolled up, Kale shows another side of himself, still dangerous, but with one less layer of armor on. After dropping his bombshell about Mateo, Soren took off. It was just the 2 of them alone with the heavy silence. He starts cooking pasta while she just watches from a stool, a glass of wine in hand. The scene is a total mind-bender. The guy who clinically erases problems like Mateo is making dinner. "You can cook," she says. "My mother wouldn't have it any other way," he replies, not looking up from the pan. "Italian?" she asks. "From Naples," he specifies, and for a second his voice goes soft, the only version of soft he seems to allow. "She also would have color-coded the library much better than you." A laugh escapes her, totally out of place with all the tension. Kale turns his head, and that ghost of a smile she can't resist appears. They eat at the counter, and the awkward conversation finally starts to flow naturally. It wasn't forced. It was just 2 people carrying massive secrets, finding a safe space in the quiet kitchen. Then, out of the blue, he mentions Nico, saying the name as if the guy never really left. His younger brother died at 22. Got ambushed 5 years ago in some turf war she couldn't even begin to understand. For Kale, it isn't just grief, it's a crushing guilt that he failed as a protector. "You never found out who gave the order?" She finishes his story, reading between the lines. "Never," he confirms, shutting down completely, retreating into that quiet rage that's become a part of him. She stares into her wine, then decides to open up too. "My dad walked out when I was 12, she starts. "He didn't die, he just left. It's a different kind of messed up. No clean grief, just you trying to untangle yourself from a fault that was never yours." Kale listens with that insane focus he has, not trying to think of a reply, just absorbing her story. "It's why I stayed with Mateo so long," she adds. the confession just spilling out in the room's weirdly safe vibe. She had confused wanting stability with being in love, using a broken compass from the very start. The silence after wasn't awkward, it built a bridge between them. When he gets up for more wine, she moves with him, a perfectly synced, unconscious motion. As she gets closer to the counter, she's suddenly right in his personal space. And get this, neither one of them moves back. A heavy quiet falls over them, and suddenly the air is thick with things they aren't saying. Kale's expression is completely unguarded. A look she now knows comes right before he drops a truth bomb. He lowers his head, a slow move that gives her a chance to stop whatever's coming. His eyes drop to her mouth, her breath catches, and she can only think how real this is. Nothing like that 10-second fake out at Noir. So that first kiss? All for the cameras, a total power move. But this one? This was the real deal, just for her. He gently pulls her in, his body heat practically building a wall around her back. This kiss was a whole galaxy, and it was pulling her into its orbit hard. She instinctively grabs his jacket, her brain totally short-circuiting from his focus, right as the kitchen door swings open. Talk about bad timing. In busts, Soren takes 2 steps, gets the whole picture, and performs a tactical retreat. He trips on the door, drops a spicy Italian curse word, and just like that, Kale and Sloane jump apart. There's a super awkward silence before she just lets out a nervous laugh. 'Cause what else do you do? Then Kale drops a genuine smile, a super rare event that totally changes his face and gets seared into her memory. Got intel, Soren deadpans from the hallway, acting like the last 30 seconds were a glitch in the Matrix. Kale gives her one last look, part promise, part question, which she downloads and saves without replying. Soren reappears, all business, holding a tablet. He drops it onto the counter, and a map of Southport lights up. 3 red dots and 1 name. Varga, bringing her 2-year-long lie crashing back down. Varga, Soren says to Kyle. Action at the port in the last 6 hours. 3 containers are shady, and Mateo's running the show. This was planned, not random. Kale studies the map with his usual ice-cold focus, but she sees it differently now. He's using the port as leverage, Kale tells Soren, then his eyes snap to her. The look screamed that things were about to go dark, and she knew the stakes just got way higher. Chapter 7. The Hidden Truth. On Wednesday, Kyle summons her to his office. It wasn't a request, it was a command. A plan was locked and loaded. She follows him to a massive oak door, which he locks behind them. He stands there, his usual poker face finally cracking with some raw vulnerability. Sloane, he says, I'm more than just a CEO. She knew better than to interrupt Calle Rienzo mid-revelation, so she stayed dead quiet. He then breaks down the entire Rienzo family business, their purpose, their chokehold on New York, his role as the Don, and the fact that their name is basically a death sentence. He laid out the grim truth with surgical precision, no sugarcoating the brutal facts. She just took it all in without a single tear or freakout. Totally not how she imagined she'd react to this bombshell. She hit him with that bone-deep silence she'd warned him about, which was way scarier than her screaming. When he finished, she asked to be alone. He let her go, and she walked past him, zoned out in her bedroom, and just stared at the floor for who knows how long. 2 hours later, Soren knocks. Less of a question, more of a warning that he's coming in. He sits down, tablet at the ready, clearly holding info too hot to wait for her to get her head straight. Got something for you, he says, his voice weirdly guarded. Mateo Varga isn't just some rival mobster. He was the one who fed Nico's location to the ambush 5 years ago. He set the whole thing up, but he didn't give the final kill order. She needed 3 full seconds to even process that. "Are you absolutely sure?" "I am," he says, "and Kale doesn't know yet. I'm on my way to tell him." Soren leaves, and Kal's tragic backstory just got twisted into a nightmare she couldn't even imagine. She had to get some air. The mansion, once a safe house, now felt like a cage closing in. She tried to tell herself that Mateo was handled and the port was a separate issue. She was the safest place in Manhattan, she repeated, knowing it was a complete and total lie. She slipped out a side door into the garden, completely unaware she was being watched. In the creepy October light, she found a bench and just collapsed, trying to breathe and piece her mind back together. He moved without a sound. The first thing she felt was a hand on her arm like a steel trap. Another figure emerged from the shadows, and before she could react, they were snatching her in a clean, pro-level kidnapping. A scream ripped out of her, but a gloved hand instantly choked it off. They threw her into a car as the mansion disappeared. Their stop, a nasty warehouse at the Southport that reeked of seawater, rot, and total abandonment. They strapped her to a metal chair while 2 goons faded into the background. Mateo stood in front of her, his face showing zero anger, just pure, chilling calculation. "Rienzo will trade the Southport for you," he states, like it's already a done deal. "You've been watching me for 2 years, she fires back, her voice steady. "Do I really seem like someone he'd trade?" "My bet is he won't leave you here," Mateo replies, a flash of twisted respect on his face for a loyalty that was clearly blowing his mind. Mateo's voice drops like he's sharing a dirty secret. "I know Soren told you I'm the reason Nico's dead." His stare was intense. "I figured it would break Rienzo. Bad guess on my part." She just stared back, letting his confession hang in the foul air. "You betrayed his brother." "I gave away coordinates," he corrected her, hiding behind technicalities. "It's just business, Sloane. You wouldn't get it." "Oh, I get enough," she shot back. Less than 2 hours later, Kale arrived. The first sign was the guards freezing up in pure, primal fear. The side door slid open, revealing Kal, Soren, and 4 guys who moved like a special ops team. He walked to the sender, his calm more terrifying than any threat. He checked her first with a quick scan, then locked his eyes on Mateo. In that one look, now loaded with the truth about Nico, everything shifted. This wasn't a rival staring down a competitor. This was a brother. Mateo saw his fatal mistake as Kali's men surrounded him. Pride kept him standing, but his face fell as his whole plan crumbled. "You know what I did," Mateo says to Kal. "And you came yourself. That's a weakness." "No," Kali replies, his voice colder than she'd ever heard. "It's the only consequence you deserve." Mateo didn't even put up a fight as Kala's men took him. He knew struggling would just make his fate worse. Then it was just Kale and her in the stinking, silent warehouse. He walked over and started untying her, totally focused, his touch gentle as he checked her wrists before undoing the ropes. Once she was free, his hand stayed on hers for a second just to make sure she was okay. They were both completely silent. On the ride back, the city lights blurred past. Kale stared straight ahead, then, without looking, laid his hand on top of hers. Just a simple, reassuring touch. She let it stay there. He finally spoke, his eyes glued to the road. "I know you need to decide if you can live in this world, but I need you to know my feelings, for you are not part of the strategy." She just looked down at his hand, silent. She didn't pull away. Chapter 8. She woke up Friday morning with sunlight cutting through the blinds and a weird sense of clarity after the storm. The faint red lines from the ropes were still visible on her wrists. She's just staring at the ceiling, trying to tune out her body while being completely hung up on Cale. He's the total opposite of her type, a guy whose life is pure chaos, but he was the realest dude she'd met in ages. It wasn't about what he said, because the guy barely spoke. It was his vibe, totally unapologetic, and how his laser focus made her feel like the main character. A major upgrade. Then Bex busts in at 10 in the morning with coffee, radiating sheer panic. Cale had called her, and she hears this from Bex, not him, a detail she mentally bookmarks for later. On the bed, she gets the full, insane download. The warehouse, the zip ties, Mateo's psycho monologue, Cale's epic entrance that was both scary and safe, the bomb drop about his brother, and his hand on hers. Bex goes dead silent, which for her means she's deep in tactical thought mode. After letting the drama sink in for 10 seconds, she drops the killer question. "Are you scared to stay?" she asks. "Or are you scared of how badly you want to?" Her silence was a full confession. "It's the second one," Bex says, calling it like she sees it. "And that's not your cue to bail, it's your cue to be smart." She hangs out for an hour more, gives her a massive hug, and leaves the unanswerable questions hanging in the air. So she's left alone in the Wyatt mansion, her gut having made a choice her brain hadn't accepted yet. Elsewhere, Cale is totally checked out in his office. Soren walked in twice with files only to see Cale just staring at the page. Not reading squat. An error Soren quietly logged. On his third trip, Soren just stops at the door. "In all my time," he points out, "I have never seen your focus this completely shot." Kyle looks up from the papers, his face admitting it's true. "In all my time," Cale fires back. "I've never had a distraction this potent." Soren just leaves it at that, exiting with his usual precision, but his posture screamed satisfaction. Early that afternoon, Soren knocks again. He's holding a tablet, looking like a man who just closed the world's most agonizing case file. Cale glances up from his work. "Mateo's prosecution is a go," Soren reports. "The file is a lock. He has 0 legal moves left." A beat passes. Then Cale does something Soren had never seen. He puts his pen down slowly, like it weighed a ton, and just stared at it. "And the Vargas family?" he asks, his voice ironclad, trying to cage the emotion underneath. "Leaderless and exposed, their entire empire is crumbling." Soren pauses. "The European outfits are already placing bids to carve up their territory. Their New York footprint is erased." Kyle was still, his eyes fixed on the pen, deep in a moment of processing. Then, his voice low and raw, he says, "Nico was 22. "He was," Soren confirms, adding nothing more. That simple agreement was all that was needed. Kyle stands, walks to the window, and just stares at the street, arms crossed, letting the full weight of the ending sink in. Soren stays put, a silent guard witnessing a grief that didn't need words. After a moment, Cale returns to his desk, picks the pen back up, and gets back to it. This wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was real life. Quiet, final, and way heavier for it. Mateo was in prison. The Vargas were out of New York. The spy in 4B was found and neutralized Thursday morning, Soren told me later with 0 emotion. That information hit like a sniper's bullet. Every random meeting, the coffee, the door that opened at the perfect time. Her entire threat detection system had been a massive failure. Now she understood the grim price of making sure it never happened again. And the guy who sold them out 5 years ago, his debt was paid with the same cold finality Kyle Rienzo used for everything important. Soren laid out these facts for me later, his tone sterile as a medical report, but the image he created stuck. Cale, a shadow against the glass, a single pen on his desk, the office dead silent. I understood a piece of it then. Some burdens you never put down, they just change their shape. I went to find him in his office late that afternoon. I knocked. He said, "Enter." And when the door opened, he was at the window, watching the street with his arms crossed. When he turned and his eyes hit mine, the impenetrable fortress that was Kyle Rienzo showed a crack, the first real weakness I had ever seen. The room was thick with a heavy, silent energy. She stepped over the threshold. The lock clicked behind her. In that quiet, their entire story played out. The club, the napkin, the terrace, the kitchen, the warehouse, and the ghost of his touch in the car. She had to break the suffocating silence. "I'm not going to pretend you don't scare me," she admitted. "But the idea of leaving is way more terrifying than staying." He paused deliberately, closed the space between them, then held back the kiss. A total power move that left her wide open. He stood so close the air felt explosive, all his attention zeroed in on her. The usual iron mask was gone from his face. She was seeing the man underneath. "I know," he said, his voice low and honest. "And I refuse to waste this." Later in the hall, he backed her against the doorframe, his hand hitting the wall beside her head. The threat of contact was way more intense than the touch itself. She realized he was already planning their next move, a deeply unsettling thought. He pulled away, giving her a final look she had already burned into her brain, and left, knowing she'd be frozen there. She was. File under, Chapter 9, The Dinner. The restaurant was totally empty, but every single table was perfectly set. A sommelier greeted her by name, cementing the night's surreal, theatrical vibe. Cale had booked the entire place. Seeing him sitting there, alone, she got it. This was a man who didn't compromise on anything. He watched her approach, completely still, his focus like a physical force he wasn't even trying to hide anymore. She had on a simple black dress she felt so about. He didn't say a thing about it, just got up to pull out her chair with a move that felt less like manners and more like a desperate need to have her close. The tension between them finally broke as they both, without a word, lowered their defenses. He told her stories of Naples, of summers with Nico, of learning to cook to escape his grandma's loving but terrible food. She laughed, a bright, sudden sound that got a real smile out of him, softening the hard lines of his face. She fired back with tales from her studio about a client whose tattoo she was sure she'd messed up, only for him to come back asking for more. Cale's way of listening was total immersion. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to speak. Mid-meal, he put down his glass. His look sharpened and the mood flipped. "I need to ask you something," he started, "and this isn't a game." She held her breath. "Be my girlfriend," Kyle said, his tone direct, a straight-up offer with no hidden agenda. "I know who I am and what this life is, but I also know I can't picture it without you anymore." The silence in the empty restaurant was absolute. She looked him over, giving the life-altering question the serious, quiet thought it deserved. "You're going to have to put up with my color-coordinating habit," she finally said. He met her eyes. "I've already had the library remodeled." She let out a laugh as he smiled, the whole thing feeling both inevitable and perfect. He stood, came to her side, paused with his face close to hers for a long second before he kissed her, not caring about any audience in the empty room. In the car, his fingers found hers in the darkness between the seats, a simple move that erased all the distance left between them. She took his hand, watching the city lights blur by, the quiet now feeling comfortable and deep. At the house, he walked her down the hall and stopped at her door. He just watched her for a second. "You can stay in your room," he said, and it was a choice, not an order. After a moment, she turned and walked to his room instead. He went right with her. The real beginning wasn't the door shutting, it was in the hallway. It started with the deliberate, possessive way his hand landed on her waist and the sheer force of his stare, which shrunk her entire universe down to that single point of contact. So the room is pitch black, with Manhattan sparkling way out in the distance. The insane tension that had been building for weeks was so thick you could cut it. He holds her face just like he did at Noir, but this time, it was 100% real. This was no act. And for her, this was the realest thing she'd experienced in forever. He was slow, locked in, and taking his sweet time. He says her name, and hearing it without his usual tough guy act hits her so hard she knows it's gonna stick with her. At dawn, she's the first one up in a dead, silent house. Kyle is out cold next to her, looking genuinely peaceful for the first time ever. No walls up, no armor on, just free from the weight of his entire empire. In that moment, he was just a guy, and the thought was kinda beautiful. His eyes snap open, locking right onto hers with that classic laser beam stare. "Good morning," she whispers. He just smiles back and says, "That it is." At 7 a.m., she hits up Bex. The reply is instant. "Well?" So she texts back, "Well? Sloane Mercer? I need the full story right now." Meanwhile, across town, Soren hears Kale humming some Italian song in the bathroom. He just stands there for 2 seconds, then leaves with a ghost of a smile. Then, Chapter 10. Life starts falling into a pattern she didn't plan, but damn if she didn't like it better. By day, she'd hit her studio, with a low-key security team in tow, to run her empire and make her art. Then at night, she'd come home to the mansion. Its simple rhythm gave her a stability that blew away her old, messed-up ideas about love. For 2 days after their dinner, her bag stayed packed on the bed, her one-foot-out-the-door strategy. By day 3, those packed bags were basically a silent challenge, and Kale saw it but said nothing. That night, he corners her in the kitchen, looking like he's made a final call. "Make this your home," he says, and it's a proposition, not a command. "I'm not gonna have my stuff living on your floor." She lets the silence hang there, watching the muscle jump in his jaw. "You know the studio is clear across the city," she points out. "I'm aware," he says, "and that I'm up at 6 a.m. I'm aware. And I'm gonna be redoing your entire library." "That project's already been approved." She meets his gaze for another beat. He'd already thought of everything, a type of planning she was starting to see as his own hardcore way of showing he cared. "All right, you win," she admits. "But the chamber is still my domain." "I claimed it first," he shoots back with a tiny smirk. "It's our turf now." I texted Bex. She screamed so loud that Kale heard it from the other side of the room, just slowly sipping his whiskey, totally amused. We made plans to clear out her apartment that weekend. That night, from the mansion's terrace, all of New York was laid out, glittering below us. I was pressed against his chest, wrapped up in his arms, in a comfortable quiet that didn't need words. This whole thing started because I asked a random stranger for a kiss, I finally said. He didn't answer right away. His voice was low, right by my ear, with no games or BS. "I know." He paused. "It was a good call." I laughed, and he held me tighter as the city just kept on shining, not caring about us at all. That's the end of Case File 1. Case File 2 is ready and available for a small price. A whole conspiracy was brewing against Kyle Rienzo, and it wasn't about power or money. It was intensely personal. The masterminds were mapping his soul, his breathing patterns, his blind spots, the exact second he let his guard down. The weapon they sent was Victoria Laurent, a woman with the face of an angel. And Cale had no idea what was coming. The guy who saw threats in every shadow was totally blind to the one right beside him. But Sloane saw it all. The one thread she tugged on unraveled a truth way worse than anyone could have guessed. Because in their world, protecting the king often costs you the queen. Like I said, this is just a teaser from Case File 2. To see the complete raw files, you gotta hit the first link in the pinned comment. The investigation continues there. That link is the only way into the full second file, with no cuts and no censorship. The investigation is officially on. Digging into this second file is dropping some mind-blowing info, forcing a deeper dive. In this private space, we're breaking down the most twisted forms of obsession, a true dark romance. This stuff is way too intense for the main YouTube platform. This archive lets me give you the unfiltered analysis exactly as intended. Just a heads up, the public channel is officially dead, making this the only way to fund my crew and our work on these hardcore case studies. Big things are coming. I'll see you on the other side of that first link. Get this. Some shadow accounts have started hijacking our audio, mirroring the story by reposting it on YouTube. To follow the official storyline and get first access to all new chapters, you have to search My Stories by Lena on YouTube to find the real dark romance record.